This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andy Minter. The Card, A Story of Adventure in the Five Towns, by Arnold Bennett. Chapter 5. The Mercantile Marine. 1. The decisive scene, henceforward historic, occurred in the shanty known as John's cabin, John being the unacknowledged leader of the longshore population under the tail of Llandudno pier. The cabin, festooned with cordage, was lighted by an oil lamp of a primitive model, and round the orange case on which the lamp was balanced sat Denry, Cregeen, the owner of the lifeboat, and John himself, to give, as it were, a semi-official character to whatever was afoot. "Well, here you are," said Denry, and handed to Cregeen a piece of paper. "What's this I'm asking ye?" said Cregeen, taking the paper in his large fingers and peering at it as though it had been a papyrus. But he knew quite well what it was. It was a cheque for £25. What he did not know was that with the £10 paid in cash earlier in the day, it represented a very large part indeed of such of Denry's savings as had survived his engagement to Ruth Earp. Cregeen took a pen, as though it had been a match-end, and wrote a receipt. Then, after finding a stamp in a pocket of his waistcoat under his jersey, he put it in his mouth, and lost it there for a long time. Finally Denry got the receipt, certifying that he was the owner of the lifeboat, formerly known as Llandudno, but momentarily without a name, together with all her gear and sails. "Are you going to live in her?" the rather curt John inquired. "Not in her, on her," said Denry. And he went out on to the sand and shingle, leaving John and Cregeen to complete the sail to Cregeen of the Fleetwing, a small cutter specially designed to take 12 persons forth for a pleasant sail in the bay. If Cregeen had not had a fancy for the Fleetwing, and a perfect lack of the money to buy her, Denry might never have been able to induce him to sell the lifeboat. Under another portion of the pier, Denry met a sailor with a long white beard, the aged Simeon, who had been one of the crew that rescued the Hjalmar, but whom his colleagues appeared to regard rather as an ornament than as a motive force. "It's all right," said Denry, and Simeon, in silence, nodded his head slowly several times. "I shall give you 30 shilling for the week," said Denry. And that venerable head oscillated again in the moonlit gloom, and rocked gradually to a standstill. Presently the head said in shrill, low tones: "I've seen 3 of them Norwegian chaps. 2 of 'em can no more speak English than a babe unborn, nor understand what ye say to 'em, though a fair bald in their ear holes." "So much the better," said Denry. "I showed 'em that sovereign," said the bearded head, wagging again. "Well," said Denry, "you won't forget 6 o'clock to-morrow morning?" "You'd better say 5," the head suggested. "Quieter like." "5 then," Denry agreed, and he departed to St Asaph's Road, burdened with a tremendous thought. The thought was: "I've gone and done it this time." Now that the transaction was accomplished and could not be undone, he admitted to himself that he had never been more mad. He could scarcely comprehend what had led him to do that which he had done, but he obscurely imagined that his caprice for the possession of sea-going craft must somehow be the result of his singular adventure with the pantechnicon in the canal at Bursley. He was so preoccupied with material interests as to be capable of forgetting for a quarter of an hour at a stretch that in all essential respects his life was wrecked, and that he had nothing to hope for save hollow worldly success. He knew that Ruth would return the ring. He could almost see the postman holding the little cardboard cube which would contain the rendered ring. He had loved, and loved tragically. That was how he put it in his unspoken thoughts. but the truth was merely that he had loved something too expensive. Now the dream was done, and a man of disillusion walked along the parade towards St. Asaph's Road among revellers, a man with a past, a man who had probed women, a man who had nothing to learn about the sex. And amid all the tragedy of his heart, and all his apprehensions concerning hollow worldly success, little thoughts of absurd unimportance kept running about like clockwork mice in his head, such as that it would be a bit of a bore to have to tell people at Bursley that his engagement, which truly had thrilled the town, was broken off. Humiliating, that. And after all, Ruth was a glittering gem among women. Was there another girl in Bursley so smart, so effective, so truly ornate? Then he comforted himself with the reflection, "I'm certainly the only man that ever ended an engagement by just saying 'Rothschild.'" This was probably true, but it did not help him to sleep. 2. The next morning at 5:20 the youthful sun was shining on the choppy waters of the Irish Sea just off the Little Orme to the west of Llandudno Bay. Oscillating on the uneasy waves was Denry's lifeboat, manned by the nodding bearded head, 3 ordinary British longshoremen, a Norwegian who could speak English of 2 syllables, and 2 other Norwegians who, by a strange neglect of education, could speak nothing but Norwegian. Close under the headland, near a morsel of beach, lay the remains of the Hjalmar in an attitude of repose. It was as if the Hjalmar, after a long struggle, had lain down like a cab horse and said to the tempest, "Do what you like now." "Yes," the venerable head was piping, "us can come out comfortable in 20 minutes, unless the tide be setting east strong. And as for getting back, it'll be the same other way round, if you understand me." There could be no question that Simeon had come out comfortable, but he was the coxswain. The rowers seemed to be perspiringly aware that the boat was vast and beamy. "Shall we row up to it?" Simeon inquired, pointing to the wreck. Then a pale face appeared above the gunwale, and an expiring, imploring voice said, "No, we'll go back." Whereupon the pale face vanished again. Denry had never before been outside the bay. In the navigation of pantechnicons on the squall-swept basins of canals he might have been a great master, but he was unfitted for the open sea. At that moment he would have been almost ready to give the lifeboat and all that he owned for the privilege of returning to land by train. The inward journey was so long that Denry lost hope of ever touching his native island again. And then there was a bump, and he disembarked, with hope burning up cheerfully in his bosom, and it was 6:15. By the first post, which arrived at 7:30, there came a brown package. The ring, he thought, starting horribly. But the package was a cube of 3 inches, and would have held 100 rings. He undid the cover, and saw on half a sheet of notepaper the words: "Thank you so much for the lovely time you gave me. I hope you will like this. Nellie." He was touched. If Ruth was hard, mercenary, costly, her young and ingenuous companion could at any rate be grateful and sympathetic. Yes, he was touched. He had imagined himself to be dead to all human affections, but it was not so. The package contained chocolate, and his nose at once perceived that it was chocolate impregnated with lemon, the surprising but agreeable compound accidentally invented by Nellie on the previous day at the pier buffet. The little thing must have spent a part of the previous afternoon in preparing it, and she must have put the package in the post at Crewe. Secretive and delightful little thing. After his recent experience beyond the bay, he had imagined himself to be incapable of ever eating again, but it was not so. The lemon gave a peculiar, astringent, appetizing, settling quality to the chocolate, and he ate even with gusto. The result was that instead of waiting for the 9 o'clock boarding-house breakfast, he hurried energetically into the streets and called on a jobbing printer whom he had seen on the previous evening. As Ruth had said, there is nothing like chocolate